Hi everybody, my name is Michelle Jackson. I'm here with my colleague Bec White. We're from Palantir.net, and today we're going to be talking about the philosophy of content before code, which we'll dive into once everybody gets settled. We're very excited to be here presenting on this topic, and look forward to sharing our experiences with you today.
Recorder? What about it?
I think
Kevin did it for us.
Yes, we were already recording at this time. So today Red News Report. So today we're going to talk about who we are, why we're here talking to you today, what our relationship to this topic is. We're going to be talking about this content before code philosophy that really permeates all aspects of a web or digital project. We're going to be speaking specifically about our client, AcademyHealth, about the outcomes of that project and how we got there. We're also going to be taking you through our toolkit, the tools that we use when dealing with clients who are really wrangling with their content and figuring out what they want to do with that content in the context of the project. So we're super excited to be here today, and this is the agenda we have for this session.
So Palantir.net is a full-service web agency. We say we work with humanity by helping others to discover, create, and share knowledge that works. But really, we do a lot of Drupal development for institutional nonprofits like universities, hospitals, and research and membership organizations like AcademyHealth.
As I mentioned, my name is Michelle Jackson. I'm a web strategist, and you're probably wondering, what is this? So essentially, my role is to work closely with the client in getting to the bottom of their most prescient business goals. What are they really wanting to do as a company or organization? And what do you want the website to do for you? What are the top tasks that you want folks on the website to perform to make those business goals actually happen? So really, the key focus of my role is to make sure that the client understands the relationship between the website and what they want to do as a company. I also work closely with developers and designers on user experience. Specifically, my background is in research, so I do a lot of surveys, I do a lot of virtual and in-person testing like I did for AcademyHealth. And in addition to making sure that the client's needs are met and that the website works for them and their organization, I also really make sure that the website can capture those desired outcomes of the users or audiences that the site serves. So that's my role in a nutshell.
And I'm Bec White. I'm the development operations manager at Palantir. I've been working with Drupal for the past 10 years, first as an engineer, then as a tech lead, and now as kind of an architecture, DevOps, and implementation strategy resource for all of our projects. So last year I led the Drupal 8 adoption at Palantir, and AcademyHealth was our third or fourth Drupal 8 project.
So what is this content before code philosophy? Well, at Palantir, we really like to put content at the focal point of the project because it really can guide all disciplines. At Palantir, we call what we do disciplines. So, if you're building a site, that's a discipline. If you're working in strategy, that's a discipline. And what we found was that actually content is really key. And understanding clients' content is really key to making sure that everybody on your team can actually do their job and do it according to the timeline. So we realized that actually focusing on content before you get to any type of design iterations or technical implementation is key, because if you get new information about what content looks like, what it means, what types of requirements the content has, and then you have new information that the designer has or the developer, it can be challenging to work backwards, and you might find yourself having to do overhaul of the designs or having to create a whole new set of requirements. So we really put content first, to use that term that people say, but we put it first when we're working on these projects, just so that there isn't new information when we're already implementing our project plan, the designs, or the technical features of the site. So many challenges that our peer companies have is that everybody's pretty good at doing their job. Everybody, most designers, they understand what a deadline is, developers too, project management is not really a new discipline. But we often find ourselves in a situation where everything is going as planned, and then you have content there in the corner saying, I need an extension. And so you're ready to launch. Everybody's put a ton of effort into the project, and you're waiting on content. And so the focal point of this presentation is really to talk to you about how to get over that hurdle and really how to hold the client's hand in getting there, which is what we were able to do with AcademyHealth. So code doesn't really become or formulate a website until there's navigation and content, or essentially structure, and a rationale to how you're going to set up all the things on the site. Very few of the sites we build have no editorial content. So we rarely have a client who's coming to us and saying, I've never had any content on a website before, and I want you to build this completely new site for me, and I don't have any content. I'm actually working on that right now. That's rarely something we come across.
Also, the sites that we build aren't typically like apps, so they're not getting user-generated content. They're not kind of performing a task. It's not a game, and that's the kind of thing that wouldn't require content development versus kind of an informational site, a site that hosts research, a site that hosts kind of information about the organizational mission.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about our client, AcademyHealth, and the outcomes from that project, and then we're going to show you how we got here. So essentially, AcademyHealth is a membership organization, but the main goal is to disseminate research about health services. So are hospitals in this particular area doing their job? Are they able to work efficiently? Are the practitioners understanding, higher level goals within the field? So health services is essentially all the things, all the logistics that relate to healthcare. And so the goal of AcademyHealth is really to make sure that their membership and policymakers understand what's happening in this field. And so a lot of the folks that they work with are researchers and then also practitioners who are trying to improve all the processes associated with health services and healthcare logistics, essentially. So the first outcome that we had for this project was that the client was actually able to restructure the old content and prepare new content all before the development phase began. So all of their content was fully updated. This was kind of an anomaly in my experience. It was really fascinating to watch, given that we had integrated a new tool, GatherContent, that we'll be talking about later today. But essentially, they were already well equipped to really curate and then also modify their existing content before development even began. A second outcome is that we were really able to showcase content during the development phase. So because the client had already been working on this beforehand, they were able to actually evaluate how their content was working in the menu structure, and they were able to do this after each sprint. So it was a very iterative approach, because essentially they could see, I don't really think this makes sense in terms of how the content is displayed in the menu, and we want to rework this. So because they had already had a head start with the content, it really made them capable of having ownership and control over the content during development.
The other thing about this was since they saw their words in the site that we were building, even Sprint 1 looked like a real website to them. So a lot of times you'll give people a Sprint 1 outcome and it will be in Bartik. So you'll have it blue with the Drupal logo, and it's just, they're like, what is this? How does this relate to me and my organization? Well, when they see their words there, then they say, oh, it doesn't look like us, but we're still present in here, and so they can kind of see how the site evolves around their content.
The other outcome, which was also incredible, was the fast launch. So that previous slide where content is in the wings saying I need an extension, we didn't have that actually happen with this client, and in fact the turnaround time between the end of development and the site launch was very quick. And this was in large part due to their early involvement in curating and modifying and preparing content, and then also their engagement during the development phase.
So that turnaround was like a chill 2 weeks, not kind of a frantic month of content entry. What they had to do at that point was review the pages and then add in some Drupal specific stuff like add in call to action blocks, add in related content and different content relationships. But the bones of their content were there.
Another one was user testing. So because the client had so much ownership over this content, I would say management process, there wasn't the chaos of really scrambling to get all the content ready. So we were actually able to take some steps to validate if their structure and the content was actually even working for users. So we actually implemented both virtual and in-person usability testing. And I think this is in large part, like I mentioned, because they were so aware of how their content was going to be displayed on the site, that they essentially were very eager to validate this process and also had the bandwidth to do so. So we used TreeJack, which is an optimal workshop tool, and then we also, I did in-person usability tests on site during some of their premier events that had health services practitioners in town, so I actually got to test with real stakeholders on and offline. So I think that given my experience with other clients who perhaps are still trying to wrangle the content piece, it's hard for them to really accept or open their arms to usability testing when they haven't even finalized their content. So I think this approach allowed us to take those extra steps to validate the work we've done so far. And so how did we get here? How did we achieve these outcomes? Essentially, we included content planning as part of our definition phase. So we, as we were scoping out what development was going to look like, we had conversations very early on about what the content was, where the content lived, what it looked like, and what they would like it to be. And so we really made an effort to have a lot of open dialogue with the client about this particular topic. And then we also really emphasized deadlines for both new content and then also migration source data, just so we can set up our entire team for success. Because essentially, if there's a delay in receiving data sources, this also impacts not only the development phase, but also designers, because there are these contingencies. So it's really important to use deadlines so that the client can actually create their own internal deadlines and be aware of these contingencies. So we were very clear about this up front. Did you want to add anything, Beth?
Yeah, the next slide is mine. So knowing where the content is coming from is part of that, like setting deadlines for different data sources. And clients don't automatically know what those data sources should look like. So one of the things we do is we try to lock that down. We get defined data sources. So having the right data source is going to make our migration and our development in general a lot smoother. We tell them early. Early deadlines allow us to provide feedback on the content that they're giving us and on the data sources that they're giving us, so that they can fix it instead of us having to work around it in development. So if they're developing content, working with them to define that structure within which they're developing content can really make our lives a lot easier. So one of the things that happened on AcademyHealth was we had the content that they were developing locked down. We made a plan, we had a set tool, But we had some other migration sources where it wasn't locked down. And we had to delay functionality because we didn't have that content. We couldn't even define the functionality without seeing kind of a valid data source. So when we control that data source for content development, we have a lot easier time.
We also had a really different experience with the newly created or newly curated content. Our client was using, and the product owner was using GatherContent to curate content. So that process was very seamless. So on the one hand, the new content, that process was very much by the book, on deadline, on point. And then on the other end, we had, and that content was going to be migrated by GatherContent. And then on the other hand, the other migration, was held up by the data sources. So it can really show how you have to wrangle in the middle of a project because you don't necessarily know what to expect in terms of the client's ability to understand what these data sources mean.
So locking down the content, the data source, really, like I said, that makes our development a lot smoother. So we put guardrails in place. We limit the fields that clients are working on. So we really don't want clients adding super detailed, lots of stuff. We want to make sure the essentials are in place. A lot of times that means like the title, the lead, the body text, and that's it. If they have a defined taxonomy, apply tags, make sure there are tags on all their content. So keeping them focused on those things rather than going into the details like what's the call to action on this page, or what's the kind of freeform tagging, or let's get some tweets in there. We don't need your hashtags, we want your page content. And so keeping them focused makes it more likely that we'll get content from them, but it also means that we'll have a more defined, limited thing to work with. And again, that makes it easier. So we define that structure early on and put off some of the detail work. So dictating the structure is the secret sauce, I would say. If we do it somewhere we can know the structure and we can have access programmatically, we can automate it. And that is where our dev team comes in, because it means that we can have a repeatable, testable process against content that's in flux. So PowerPoint doc formats, like, you're going to be copy pasting, they're going to be copy pasting, and we're going to tell them, you have to copy paste. We can't work with this if that's what they're going to do.
And I think you can encourage the client to use a format like maybe PowerPoint or email or doc or Microsoft Office documents as part of their own internal workflow, because they might be familiar with that. They may not be familiar with new tools like GatherContent or even in some cases the Drupal Drive suite. So you can encourage them to use the tools that they're familiar with, but definitely set up a boundary in saying what is acceptable and appropriate for transferring content and data source information to your team. So I think that one way to kind of massage this is to say, this is great that this has worked for your team for 20 years in terms of having 8 versions of this one document, and that this is how this process works for you, that's fine. But in terms of relaying this information to us, this is the structure and this is the format that we need to be successful.
So we have just a little bit diving into structured content. This looks pretty structured. This is a Word doc. It has kind of sections and fields. This isn't structured as far as I'm concerned as an engineer. Like, I can't do anything with this. So, I mean, this is better than if you had it all laid out with like the title and a big one, and then the job title italicized beneath that. Like, don't with me. But what we want to see is something more like what we can get out of GatherContent, which is we can define the fields, we can set up the fields for them and give them a template to work within. same output, same like result, but much more structured in a way that I can use. And the thing about GatherContent is we can rearrange it a little without messing with development. Like if they need help tags, if they need field titles changed, it doesn't affect our developers. So what you'll see from GatherContent, this is the same kind of set of fields. There's the job title, the organization, and you can see the person's name is at the top. But it's broken out into a separate set of things. And honestly, this isn't that different from like a Drupal content editing form, except it's prettier and we don't have to maintain it. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then you can see how the structure comes through to the site that we build. So this is a profile, and there's most of these fields were defined in GatherContent beforehand. So the body text, the profile picture, their name. So we make sure that all content is coming through with at least the bones.
So content in the design. So this is always a really interesting topic because I think we see a lot of design work with lorem ipsum, and like Bec mentioned, it doesn't really evoke any feelings or reactions in the client. So they say, this looks really great, until you put a controversial article at the front and say, whoa, this cannot go above the fold. And they start to think critically about how the content is impacting the design. So we use this existing content, either newly created content or content from their current site, to lay the foundation for our design and to inform the hierarchy of the design and selection of specific design components. So this definitely came into play with AcademyHealth because as a research organization, a lot of their descriptions are quite lengthy. They're very verbose. And we had to come up with a design solution that actually made sense for users to easily consume the content. And while their audience might be more willing to read lengthy articles, we did find that many of the people who participated in the usability tests studies actually really struggled to find content. So it was acceptable to read a lengthy article, but it's not acceptable to read through lengthy text to find the article you're looking for. So it was really important that we integrated design elements you can't really see this here, but there's a gradient behind evidence. You do, if you look at the site, which we can show you later, there was a line here separating this key topic, delivering better care. We had the subtopics that would allow them to understand what this topic actually related to. And then also because they had many topics, making healthcare better was one of the two topics they chose, making research better. And we had to have different tools in place for the users to be able to quickly jump to these content buckets. So this really shows kind of our process in using the content as a foundation for our design. I think if we were to create some style tiles or comps that are independent of the content, I don't think this project would have been as successful because the design would not necessarily be considering the fact that a lot of their text is quite long, including the leads as well.
I think the other thing about their site was seeing their taxonomy in action. They had developed a new taxonomy, and so they had this idea of, oh, these terms really fit. But then when you put making healthcare better and making research better next to each other, like, are they distinguishable? Do they have separate meanings? You don't really know until you see them kind of in context.
And a taxonomy is really a way of calling something on the site. So this was a series of terms that they had identified to use in their navigation to relate better to their audience. So while it is very much industry specific, when you look at quality improvement, there's some other topics that are really specific and specialized. That's what Bec means when she says taxonomy. It was kind of a new way of calling things in the navigation, and then also the tags that supported and supplemented the content and helped organize it across the site.
So we have scheduling, we have structure, and we have design. And then we use our superpower, which is technology. having a consistent data source means that we can automate this. Automation means we can repeat it and we can test it, and it's going to be dependable throughout development. We don't have to have manual steps in the middle of development just to see content in the site. The other thing is content changes can be automatically reflected in development. So they're working independently, we're working independently. We can migrate in their content automatically as part of our setup script, and boom, their menu structure is updated. Their wording is changed. So we can actually implement this in sprint 0 before we're even in an official development sprint. If we put in bare bones content types and we have those content types matched in our content development tool, then it's really actually pretty straightforward to write a migration when you have control over the source data and you have control over the destination. So it is development work. It does take work. It does cost money, but it's straightforward and it gives you a foundation to move forward from. So it's not nothing, but we call it sprint 0.
It also really helps the client feel engaged. So I think that some of our clients are not familiar with Drupal. So this particular client, was not migrating from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. They were on a different CMS. So I think that GatherContent was a nice buffer to make them feel part of this process without necessarily having to onboard them to Drupal during kind of these more timely phases. We did have a training component at the end, but it allowed for them to feel like they were participating, like they had agency early on in the process, instead of kind of, okay, here you can watch this glazed eyes, we have a demo, this is a new CMS. They felt like they had some control over the content, which I think was really helpful in maintaining our working relationship.
So this is the only code you're going to see today in this presentation. Because we're a development shop, in addition to everything else, I wrote a migration source plugin that allows us to integrate directly with GatherContent. It's on GitHub. I'll put the link at the end. But this is actually part of one of our migration config files. So it's a YAML file. Yay, Drupal 8, welcome. It's 43 lines of config to migrate the pages from GatherContent. And there are other migrations that migrate the menu and migrate the taxonomy terms and the profiles, but this is just pages. So using migrate module rather than, there's a GatherContent integration module on Drupal.org. Migrate module just is a little easier for us to automate, a little easier for us to run with Drush. So basically, we work with clients to develop the structured content on a schedule. And then we have our defined source data, we have our defined destination, and we can automate it. I think that's our process. And that's kind of the whole integrated process. We wanted to talk a little bit about the tools that we use, because we kind of have a bag of tricks. We work with a lot of different data sources. And what we're doing here, and what was so successful for AcademyHealth, was that we turned the client's content development process into a data source. So we have this human process, this messy content output, and we make it a nice regular data source so that we can work with it. So we're going to talk about some of the different tools that you can use for content development and how they work as data sources. So CSVs are kind of the lowest common denominator for developers working on migrations. If a client sends me, a list of taxonomy terms in an email, I might just make a CSV out of it and check it into my repository and migrate from it. I'm sorry for those of you who aren't oriented towards development. I'm just spouting nonsense. But spreadsheets are also really familiar to clients. That's good because they'll use it, and it's bad because they'll use it badly. Sometimes I use it as like a spatial layout tool. You get a spreadsheet with color coding, with merged cells, with like inconsistent field data. We put some URLs with like HTTP at the beginning and some without. We get kind of names broken up in different ways or different capitalizations on taxonomy terms. Yay. So the other problem is that it can be hard to keep changes in sync between the spreadsheets that the clients are working on and what we're actually using as a migration source. So what happens is you email me an updated version of the spreadsheet, or you say, okay, the Google spreadsheet is ready to go, and I dump it to a CSV and add it to my migrations. So it's not as dynamic. Honestly, though, I do love working with Google spreadsheets because I can leave comments for the client about why their data is wrong and what they can do to fix it. And then they'll fix it, and I don't have to fix it during development. I don't have to do like crazy workarounds. They'll just make it right for me.
Can you explain CSV?
Sorry, a CSV, comma-separated values. It's like a spreadsheet, but easier for computers. Harder for people, easier for computers. So another thing that sometimes folks do is they update the content in their existing content management system. This is great because they can update all their content. They have all their content, it's there, and they know the source system, so they know how to edit it. Everybody who needs to edit it already has access. Go for it. The problem is that you can't reorganize. You can't add new fields, you can't add new images, and more importantly, you can't update the navigation. And that's a huge opportunity of any site rebuild, is to update the navigation. So if you lose that opportunity, you're really kind of screwing yourself over. So sometimes you can update and then reorganize once you're in Drupal, but really, that's the big problem with it. The other thing is we've migrated from really wacky old systems, Cold Fusion based, like miscellaneous MySQL things rolled in-house. It's a lot of database archaeology, and it's painful, and it adds weeks of back and forth just figuring out what the right data is. So even if you're not like actually doing development for all those weeks, you are just trying to figure out with the client what fields are relevant. How do I figure out what in this database is meaningful to you? So it's okay. What's good, sometimes people know there's a part of their database that's up to date. That's fine, I like it. We love GatherContent. We've talked about it. GatherContent is a website for developing content. It allows you to enter the stuff and give it a hierarchy. The client can have a bunch of users, they can work independently and rearrange things, and they can have as much or as little workflow as they want. They can schedule, they can label, they can have all sorts of notifications. I don't care, go for it. Like, there's a lot there. It's great.
We also had one deadline for GatherContent, I believe, that was a hard stop for them. So it really allowed them to understand what that meant in terms of, okay, once we hit this date, you can no longer update and gather content and have the expectation that this will be reflected in the new Drupal 8 site. And so they understood that. And I think that's what makes this tool so fantastic, is that it really allows them to understand when to stop. Because I think some clients, it's like, well, I can keep going, there's still this other piece. And I think that we were able to communicate, I think, by including them in the editorial process, that this is a tool that we're going to work together on and we're going to collaborate with you on, but there is this final stop. I think it's harder to do that in their current CMS because it's challenging to be in their current site, building a new site, in the data source files, and essentially to tell them you need to stop working on your current site is a little bit harder to convey to clients.
So because we love GatherContent, we're going to talk a little bit more about it, more in depth than the other stuff. GatherContent has a great API, which makes it a great migration source. What's an API? It's a way for us to interact with it programmatically. So we can get specific parts of the data and we can vacuum it all in by pressing a button after we write that script. There's a fast turnaround time between the development phase and the site launch. We talked about this with respect to AcademyHealth. They can update their content and we can pull it in automatically whenever we want. We do it at every demo. Developers do it whenever they set up a site. It's easy. We just pull the latest changes. And the same applies right up to launch. We pull the latest changes from GatherContent and then we hand it over. The problem is they might not be familiar with the tool. How much should we accommodate people who don't want to learn new things? You kind of, if they're not going to use it, there's no point in us using it. So you accommodate it up to the point where they'll use it. GatherContent also costs money. As an agency, we found it useful to have an account for our clients, but it may not be worth it to everybody. Try it out. They have a trial. This one is you, MJ.
So I have a background in nonprofit work, and I know how so many of our clients just love working in email. They love Word documents, and even the clients we work with now sometimes will say, I don't know how to use the Google Doc, so I have curated this Word document. And so version control can be a problem, but this is the preferred communication method and editorial review process medium for many clients. And so what I found to be useful in working with AcademyHealth was, like I mentioned, to encourage them to use this for their own process. This is what your stakeholders, what your CEO is familiar with. This is fine, but let's transfer your process to GatherContent, where we can work together on this and where it is executed in a medium that our lead, our technical lead can actually use. And so I think that is a good way to get around this particular challenge. Also, there is a lack of hierarchy. You can't import automatically. This would be another example of that unstructured content Word doc that you saw, that while it is structured, I mean there's a title like Bec mentioned, but it's very challenging. You have to have special software to be able to actually read doc files that you don't necessarily have to have with the CMS. This is usually something that I like to keep in the realm of the client in terms of their tool that they're using for content curation and editing.
So when you're choosing a content development tool, the number one thing is it needs to provide some structure, and the other number one thing is they need to use it. So you don't want to pick something that they're not going to use, because then you also won't get content. So if they're really fixated on Word docs or email, they're going to have to copy paste, and we're going to run into those problems. So just get them using a spreadsheet at least.
So the slide actually says find a tool that provides structure, but that the content development folks will use. So just to give you some context on that slide, which did not carry over.
So that's our talk. That's our experience. We have a couple of resources. The migration module that we talked about is there. We mentioned TreeJack, so I just put that link up there. And does this mean we have time for questions, or?
Yeah, I think we could maybe take a minute to just show GatherContent, and we'll bring that over just to show you what that actually looks like.
This is going to be hard without mirroring.
So you'll see on this page that there's a series of templates that we've created. So Bec had talked about the importance of really confining the client to predefined structure and fields, and really limiting the number of fields that they're using. So we actually created templates with the fields that we wanted them to use that were mutually agreed upon. And this is an example of, it's a little bit challenging to see this with the light, but you'll see that there's page, section, program. Program is just kind of a category, like an initiative, event, topic, profile. And I think this was a really great example of a guardrail, essentially, and really keeping them confined. I'm on other projects now, and we're not using GatherContent, and let me tell you, the fields just there's more and more fields every day. So I think that, one hypothesis that a colleague had was, well, the client's familiar with Drupal, it's Drupal 7, so GatherContent is really for folks who perhaps are not familiar with Drupal. I'd argue now, after having those two experiences, that that's not the case. I think that GatherContent is still really effective because I think that clients that are familiar with Drupal will have lots of ideas about the types of fields or taxonomies that you can have. And then, of course, it's hard to confine their robust input. And I think it's useful for people regardless of their level of familiarity with the CMS, just so that you can stay on task and on deadline.
Can I switch to screen sharing? Like, turn off mirroring?
Sure.
Okay, because that will make it easier to show the other part.
This is not what it is. System preferences, display here. And then we do mirror displays. Sure.
Beautiful. Okay.
Here we go.
Beautiful. So what we're seeing here is a page. It's the About page on AcademyHealth.org. So you can see this page here. They've updated the page since it's moved to Drupal, but this is the starting point. There's a lead field right here, and then there's the body field. And then at the bottom of the page, there's the featured image. So the featured image isn't required, so we just put it at the bottom. So that they would focus on the things that would actually have a really concrete impact on the page, which is you got to have your lead text and you got to have your body text. So you can see here, lead text, body text. This way, the client isn't really worrying about the other things on the page, about the menu, about the share links. We did have a call to action available, but it's on a separate tab. Like, don't focus on there. Focus on getting the primary content for the page. So that's what we mean when we talk about guardrails. Yes?
So let's say that you have a complex page, and you have some key information, but you also have some tertiary content. Would you have them go through and then revisit later, or how would you handle that?
What do you mean tertiary content? Like,
yeah, something that is, not key to it's not the core of, when you're setting up guardrails, how do you do it effectively? So you're gathering what you need, but you're not creating barriers later where they have to go back and add content or things, smaller things get overlooked later.
I would say there are things that are a lot easier to do once you have the site in place, like those sidebar blocks. And honestly, I would say that's for the review period. Like, get your structure in place, get your key pieces so that no page is empty, so that your navigational structure actually is filled out. And then when you need to add call to actions, add them on the site. Because a lot of times those tertiary elements are more design sensitive. So choosing the words for the CTA button, choosing how you're going to do a call out block on the page, like what text you're going to feature, you're probably going to want to fiddle based on the styling that you have available.
So ideally, even very early in the process, if you had many fields, they would have access to all of those immediately, not just a title and a body and an image.
I can show you a slightly more complicated content type that we have in GatherContent. This is the profile. And so we have a job title, organization, a subtitle, and the lead bio. And then there's a taxonomy here.
We had related content later that was then integrated, but that was not something that they were really working on in the context of this profile. So if you go to the profile page, you can actually see, because we did have an example from it's about, and then it's people, and then staff, or you can report. And you'll see that, I think Bonnie was our example. You'll see if you can scroll down that there's all, the blog posts. While we're crafting a profile, we wouldn't have them focus on the related content. So that could be some tertiary content. We'd have them focus on the, what is static, what is constant, which essentially would be their bio, their title, and then we would have them work perhaps on, blog post related matters separately, just so that they're not overwhelmed. So we'll talk about the fact that related content will happen, but keep it separate from that conversation.
Is that more a function of keeping them focused versus the technology end? I know it would add complexity to your migration and that, but could you actually do that in this tool? Can you map some of that related content, those kinds of things, or is that kind of a limitation of the?
GatherContent doesn't support relationships between items, or at least at the time that we were using it. They're always adding things, but
so the taxonomy is about as close as they get to that?
That's kind of where we left it. You can kind of embed content types, like I showed you the page content in GatherContent, and we have a separate tab for call to action.
Yeah.
And so within the Drupal site, the call to action is a separate content type.
Gotcha.
And so that's a relatively simple, like one-to-one relationship in that case. But really, that technical limitation turns into an advantage for keeping clients focused, reducing complexity, and also not asking clients to do things that they don't have content or context for. So if you don't know what that page is going to look like with that design element, a lot of times those extra things on the page are kind of runtime decisions. You want to save it, view the page, see how it's going to look to people, and then edit it. Change your link text, change your title.
I think you kind of started to get at it here, but I was wondering how you approach, you didn't talk too much about like content types or entities, and I was wondering how you approach those in your sites and how they relate to what you're doing in GatherContent. So I guess one question might be like for this site, like how many content types are there, and how do they match up with what's happening in GatherContent?
So
Paragraphs.
And also
don't say that word. Well, because we have control over the definition and we work with the client pretty closely to define these things, the content types in GatherContent, or the templates as they call them, line up one-to-one with content types in Drupal.
Okay.
There were additional content types in Drupal that came from separate migration data sources. So they had an internal database of fellowships, and that content wasn't curated in GatherContent because we were just able to migrate it. We also migrated from their WordPress blog, and that also wasn't in GatherContent. So there are probably 9 or 10 content types, but we focused in GatherContent on pages, profiles, and events, which the other stuff isn't really in the menu structure. Even profiles aren't in the menu structure in Drupal, but pages really form the backbone of that.
So my colleague was actually sharing that we're at time, but Bec and I will be around for a little bit if you want to touch base with us outside of the room, just so we can free it up for the next session.
Thank you all so much.